Aha! This is Labort, and it is so nice to have you here. These are the paints you need. If you want to see how I painted the base, you can access that content on my Patreon page. The link is in the video description. Cover the rotten parts with wine red. This will act as our darkest recess shadow. I layer in some decomposed flesh using a thin consistency. Try to achieve maximum opacity on the chin. Make sure you leave a tiny black line between the teeth so they look more defined and crispy. It's not easy to figure out where the mask ends and the skin begins around the eyes, so if you painted the skin part too big, just go back with black to fix it. I glazed some delilah lilac around the shadowy parts of the face to make it more dead looking. Very thin consistency. After that I painted the eyes, but Papa Laborts is very sorry he couldn't record that part, but I used ice yellow for the eyes, but any off-white color of your choice will work fine. Now it's time for the red parts. I used burnt red, and on the shield I left the extreme shadows black. On the shield it's extremely important that you sketch the highlights in a radial pattern, otherwise it will look weird. So make sure your red areas all line up and lead into the center of the shield. After that I glazed over the extreme shadows and blend in the black and the burnt red. From now on, especially on the shield, we will repeat the process with every new color and it will take some time. So be prepared for it or I will slap on your tiny hand. Okay, at this part for some reason I decided to mix some burnt red to the decomposed flesh and darken the jawline a little bit. Then I covered all the white parts with ashen grey. On the inside of the shield I left some areas black in a radial pattern. I jumped from the red metal parts because I realized the inside of the shield would be very hard to paint since the arm of the miniature blocks a good chunk of it, so it needs to be done first, otherwise I could make more mistakes by trying to paint the inside of the shield with the painted parts around it, and as long as the body is black, it's no big deal if I make a mistake. Once you sketch the areas, blend in the color with some glazing. Next, I used Thunderhawk blue to reduce the highlight areas. Thin layers and some extra glazing were needed. Make sure you keep the radial pattern on the shield and blend in the colors nicely. I know it's really time consuming, but trust Papa Laborts when he says it's worth it. Then I add some ice yellow to the Thunderhawk blue and further reduce the highlight areas. Add more ice yellow and continue the process. It's quite laborious, but that's how you paint an MM, guys. We need those silky smooth blends like Granny's butt cheek. It's a slow process because the shield is a flat surface and flat surfaces need more blending, unfortunately. Now add ivory to the mix and paint those final highlights. Use thin layers and the same steps we used before. Now that you are done with these grey and white metal parts, let's do the exact same thing for the red parts with different colors. I'm using Evil Sun Scarlet because I love it. On the boots, try to pick out the details like on the shoelaces and make sure one side is more highlighted than the other. Same goes for the other gloves, but on the gloves, try to follow the folds with your shadows and highlights. If you manage to paint the white parts on the shield, this will be easy as well, but if you don't, please let me know if you had any problems. Continue the process with Wild Rider Red. If you're ever in doubt about the highlight placements, just check the link in the video description and look at the reference picture. I'm using thin layers again, so it will be easier to blend those white glazing. Add some ivory to the Wild Rider Red and sketch the brightest highlights. I only use this layer on the shield. I don't think it's necessary on the boots and the gloves. Okay, let's move to the suit. I covered all the blue parts with Night Lord's blue. Then I sketched out the highlights with a mix of ahriman blue and Night Lord's blue. You see, at first I left some recesses around the top part of the chest and back very dark blue. But you can cover those parts with pure ahriman blue because we will push the contrast pretty high with the suit and we don't need those very dark shadows there. Reduce the highlight areas with ahriman blue. The major highlight areas are the shoulders, chest, thighs and the skull. Use thin layers to blend in the colors easily. Thanks to the textured surface, this part doesn't need that much work for blending. Now mix some baharroth blue to the ahriman blue and reduce the highlight areas. To make use of the scales on his suit, you can paint a few around the area you sketched out so it blends in more organically. After that, use pure baharroth blue and continue the process. As you can see, I made the previous layer a bit bigger, so the midtone is now a lot brighter. That's just part of the process. If you feel like you want something brighter, you just try removing some layers, starting with the darkest ones, and see how it feels. It doesn't mean I removed the dark blues from everywhere. As you can see on his side, it still has a high contrast, and those dark blues are still present on the miniature. Lastly, I add some ice yellow to the baharroth blue and put the final highlights on his front shoulder, right side of the chest and helmet. Then I painted the letter A on the helmet and the wings because I forgot to do it when I was painting the other white parts. Basically, you start with the thunderhawk blue and add some ivory over a few layers. You don't need to do anything crazy because these details are very small. I covered the leather straps and pouches with burnt red and kept adding some decomposed flesh for highlight colors, leaving some darker areas along the folds that face down. After that, I started to work on the OSL effect. We basically paint a line starting from the boot and end on the lower part of the shoulder. Use thin layers so it will be easy to blend. I'm not using an airbrush this time, but you can do if you feel like it. If you watched the Black Panther or Thor tutorial previously, then you know that we need to enhance our money shot with the OSL. So this bright red line needs to be exactly on the side of the chest. Otherwise the effect won't be as spectacular. It is also important that you have the darkest blue next to the OSL color. Use thin layers on the shield to get a smooth blend like Granny's butt cheek. Add some ivory to the White Rider red and push the contrast on the chest a little bit. Then we glaze some Fire Dragon Bright over these highlights, and with that the OSL is done. Mix some burnt red with black and paint these blood splatters over the character. This really makes the zombie part more believable. We are painting coagulated blood basically, which is very dark once it's fully dries. Use a brush with a nice tip for this detail work, otherwise it will look more smudgy, and make sure that some of the blood spills perpendicular to the ground. With that, Cap is ready for the table, and if you play hero mode, make sure you always double check what's on your left. So thank you for joining me on this little painting adventure. A huge thanks to my Patreons who support these kind of videos, with special shout out to Jonathan Rose, Cold-Blooded Dom, Trying to Paint Minis, Jonathan Mosner, Rulzak, Vlad D, Earthable21, One Sharp Joe Crafts, Glitchy Macrash, and Guillaume Belanger. If you want to support the work of Papa Labors, you can do that on Patreon, where you will have early access to these videos and you can vote on the next mini. Or if you need a little bit of extra help, online coaching is also available. I hope the rest of your day will be as smooth as a granny's butt cheek.